When I was praying over the readings for this week, I was struck by the second reading. So pardon me if I focus a little more on St. Paul and not on the more Christmassy reading of the gospel. I figure you're going to hear a few homilies on the incarnation, the coming of Jesus. I'm going to focus a little bit on Paul today. Now, Paul, when he writes his letter, this is to the church in Rome, the Romans, he often begins his letters by identifying himself, right? He was writing to a mix of people. Some knew him, some didn't. Some had heard of him. So he was introducing himself at the beginning of the letters. And it made me think, I do that sometimes too in my emails, right? If I don't know someone or someone's introducing you, you just, hello, my name's Father Mark Haydu, so-and-so told me to reach out to you because, you introduce yourself. No one wants to get an email from someone who's like, who's this and why are you writing me, right? You want to know, right? Or sometimes someone arrives into the house and you think you're alone and you wait a second, you hear something in the other room and you're like, oh my God, who's there? And if someone answers, oh, it's me, I came, okay, great. Once you know who you're dealing with, all of a sudden there's peace, right? So Paul introduces himself. He reveals his identity. And what's interesting and what caught my eye and what I prayed over was how Paul identifies himself. How does Paul define himself when he's introducing himself to others? He leads to these Romans, I'm Paul, a slave of Christ. That's his lead. It's like, whoa, like why pick that as a way to introduce yourself, right? And so he sees himself that way. He belongs to Jesus. He's owned by him. He serves him. He does his bidding. His whole life is wrapped up in the life of another, his master, in Jesus. That's who he is. It signifies who he belongs to. Now, obviously, on human terms, slavery is wrong. No doubt, no human owns another human or has a right over someone else's life. That fundamental truth is why, obviously, slavery is wrong, and a lot of other moral things are wrong. But in relationship to God, there is that human reality of something that in itself is evil that does reveal something. In relation to God, yes, I am his. He is my creator. I belong to him. I follow him. He holds me in the palm of his hand. My destiny is wrapped up in his providence, right? There is a sense of ownership, which is true. Secondly, Paul says, I'm an apostle, called to follow Jesus as a disciple, right? To imitate Jesus, to mirror his life, to walk with him, to learn from him, right? As the disciples did. But an apostle is a little different from a disciple. A disciple follows, learns, imitates. But an apostle then takes that knowledge and goes out and tries to get other people to become disciples, right? He sees himself not just as a disciple, I believe, and that's just my creed, so sorry if that bothers you, but this is just me, it's okay. No. And I think you should also be a disciple. He becomes an apostle. In fact, he's writing to the Romans to convince them of certain things. Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus rose from the dead. He's encouraging the church there, what they believe in, right? He is an apostle. He's a salesman. He's an evangelist. He goes out, tries to convince, right? That's the way he sees it. That's his identity, right? And he wasn't always that, right? That wasn't always who he was. He was a Jew, a Pharisee, right? Then Jesus knocked him off his horse and made him something else, invited him to be something else. He was no longer a Jew or a Pharisee, but now a Christian. And it became his identity, right? And he finishes up the letter by encouraging those he's writing to that they should also share his identity, be Christians, have that obedience in faith, to be holy, right? And as I thought about this identity, I thought it's important to also clarify. When we speak of identity, who we are, some things are essential to us and can never change, right? And other things can, right? Our identity, when I say, who are you? Well, one answer is, I'm human, right? I'm a human being. It's my identity. I'm not a dog, not a cat. I can't really identify as those things. I can be a human who poses as those things, dress up like those things, but that's not who I am. It's not my identity. I am human. I am, as we know, a male or female. I'm from this family. I'm Mark, right? My parents are these. I was born here, right? Those are all things that are defined for me. I can't choose or change those things. That's who I am, my identity. I had a friend who was born in Ohio, and then he moved to Michigan. And then he'd tell everybody, so where are you from? And he'd say Michigan. And I said, no, you're not. You're from Ohio, right? Well, yeah, he moved when he was in 8th grade, and then he came back when he was a senior, but he liked Michigan football, so he always told everybody he's from Michigan. Well, no, you're from Ohio, but you now moved to Michigan, and like, that's okay. You're from, like, you can't, and no one, we understand what they mean, right? But if you look where he was born, hey, that's where he was born. And you can't change those things. Let's look now, once we understand a few of those things on identity, Paul's identity, and just some basic things that are fixed at who we are. But then there's other things that we become, that we put on, that we evolve into, that God calls us into. Mary, right? She says, in the gospel says, a virgin, unmarried, never with a man. And tradition also holds that she wanted to be that forever. She had aspirations to devote herself to God's service, to be a virgin all her life. But then God called her to become a mother. And so she also, giving birth to Jesus, became that, a mother. But what's miraculous is she is both. She's a virgin and a mother. Usually, most people, everybody else in the world, you identify, you are that. Once you become a mother, you're no longer that. It's one or the other. You can't be both. But that's the miraculous thing that Isaiah foretells and that Mary is. She's both. Amazing what God does in her. She is 100% Jesus's and God's. For me, for example, as a priest, being a virgin is part of my identity. I'm a celibate. That's who I am, 100% for the Lord, right? And that's the way I live. It's the way I communicate. People see you that way. Wow, you're all in with your faith because of your, it's my identity. Yeah, part of who I am. Could that change? Could I leave and go get married? Yes. No, don't worry, no plans. But I could, I guess. I'm free. And some people say, well, couldn't priests get married? Yeah, you could. The church could change the discipline. It's a pretty long tradition, pretty solid tradition. I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. But it could. It's part of my identity, but some of those things could change, right? But for Mary, that's her. God gave her both those identities. She is mother and virgin, right? And then Joseph, right? Foster father, right? He's just a man, but he becomes the father of God. That becomes his identity. That's the gift God gives him. It's who he is. Jesus, right? The Emmanuel, God with us. Jesus is both God and man. Fully human, fully God. He's both, which is miraculous, right? That what we call hypostatic union. The union of both those natures in Jesus. Fully God and fully man. And he is, and we all identify and believe him as such, right? We believe that's who he is. He's not just someone who posed as that. Down in Times Square, there's a guy who poses as Jesus. He gets up there and preaches, right? I ran into him also in Little Italy as well. So he moves around. He's a mobile Jesus, right? But we all know he's not Jesus. He might even think he's Jesus, but we're like, okay, well, maybe we got to help him clarify a little bit, his mental state. But he thinks he is, interesting conversations, right? I was outside Old St. Pat's chatting with him once. He was dressed as Jesus. I was chatting with him, and someone took a picture and sent it to me and said, I saw you in the city with Jesus. I said, thank you. And there's a great picture also. When I was in Rome, they were filming The Passion of Christ, and when we were on the set, and there was a priest, a Jesuit priest, who was also there, often brought communion to Jesus. Right, so you had Jim Caviezel fully in role and all, with his makeup on as Jesus, and he was there kneeling, receiving Jesus. Pretty powerful image. Our identity now. Who are we? Who are we? It's good to reflect on that, and this is maybe the invitation. Where do you find your identity? How do you define yourself? When you introduce yourself to people, how do you do that? Someone you don't know, hey, slave of Christ, right? Probably not the thing you'd say as an entry line at a cocktail party over Christmas, right? But how do you define yourself? right? Obviously as a human being, obviously as a man or a woman, or from a certain state or from a certain family, but also how much of your identity is a Catholic Christian, right? How much is being an apostle who you are, right? I was talking with a businessman the other day and in coaching, and I asked him, as I often do, again, what are you hoping to get out of this coaching relationship? What's one of your goals for next year as I kind of accompany you and help you? And this was the first thing he said. I need to learn to be more of, and he didn't say the word apostle, but just more comfortable in my faith with other people. I always kind of hide it, at work and other things. I just, I know it's not the best, but I just don't do very much or say very much. I'm kind of always, and I just don't, I'm at the stage in my life, I shouldn't really care what people think about me, but I want to grow in that, right? I want to be more of an apostle. I want that to be more of my identity, right? That's what other aspects, are in your identity, right? Maturity in Christ, maturity just human, is to grow into and to identify more fully with who we truly are. And who we truly are, much of it is a gift. God made us human beings, made us male and female, made us through baptism, his sons and daughters, calls us in Christ, like Paul reminds us, to become apostles, disciples, right? And maturity is becoming more and more that, learning through prayer, through those who we surround ourselves with, those things that we choose and do, growing up into Christ, right? So this Christmas, we're celebrating the fact that Mary and Joseph recognized Jesus' true identity. They received that through revelation, the angel, etc., and they believed. And we celebrate that they had that faith in Jesus' identity as the Son of God, even if it was veiled as a baby. We celebrate that faith and ask for ourselves to have that faith. And I invite you, as a little bit of homework, you might take a moment to even sit down in a moment of prayer or reflection to write down what are the key characteristics of your identity. How do you identify yourself? How do you find your identity, your rootedness in who you are? Just write down some key fundamental aspects, adjectives of who you are. Obviously, I pray and I'd invite you to see it in the eyes of faith. Who are you before God? Who does he see you as? And as we root ourselves in who we are, and as we choose to be more mature by living in accord with that, we'll be more free, more happy, more fulfilled, and I think also more like Jesus, whose coming we'll celebrate in Christmas. God bless.